Hey there, I'm your city tour guide, and by day I show people around the pretty streets, the nice houses, the places you're supposed to look at. But I also know what happens behind the doors. Another day, another story. Welcome to the diaries. Let's go.
I am standing in the hallway of a man who is my son, listening to him cry behind a door I cannot open. 6 months ago, I was in his bed. He didn't know. I did. And that is the only crime that matters in a world full of them. The smell hit me before he did. It was the cologne first, that particular musk that young men over-apply when they are still uncertain of their own gravity, when they think scent is armor. But beneath it, underneath the chemical bloom of department store vanity, there was something older, something that had lived in the hollow of my neck 32 years ago and had never quite decomposed. Baby powder, sour milk, the sweet fungal warmth of a newborn's scalp in the hour before dawn. I stood in the arched doorway of the empty Victorian on Hawthorne Street, my hand still curled around the cold brass knob, and I felt the floor of the world tilt beneath my heels. He was standing by the bay window with his back to me, looking out at the rain-soaked Japanese maple where some previous owner had tied a child's swing years ago and never bothered to remove it. The rope had rotted through. The wooden seat hung crooked, accusatory, a broken promise against the gray sky. The afternoon light, what passed for light in Portland in late November, caught the edge of his jaw, the slope of his shoulder beneath the charcoal wool coat. And then, God help me, he turned. The birthmark. Right temple. A small wine-colored stain no larger than a thumbprint, shaped like a comma, like a pause in a sentence that should never have been spoken. I had kissed that mark when he was 6 hours old. I had pressed my chapped, bleeding lips to it and whispered a name I was not allowed to keep, a promise I was not equipped to fulfill. Now it sat there, pulsing like a warning beacon, on the face of a man who had just written a check for the down payment on a house I was selling. Elena Voss, I said, extending my hand, because that is what you do when the axis of your life has snapped, and you are wearing a blazer from Ann Taylor that you bought to feel legitimate. Ethan Cole. His palm was warm, dry. The hands of a man who builds things, who measures twice and cuts once, who believes that every problem can be solved with enough precision. Thanks for showing it on a Sunday. I know it's your day off. My day off. Yes. I had been planning to sit in my apartment on Belmont with the radiator that clanked like a dying man's heart, eating pad thai from a carton that had been in the refrigerator for 3 days, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that had spread until it resembled a continent I didn't recognize. Something African. Something broken. Instead, I was here, breathing the same humid air as a ghost I had spent 3 decades exhaling. I love what you've done with the listing, he said, turning back to the window. His voice was deeper than I expected. A voice that had been somewhere. The photos don't do it justice. The light in this room, it's cruel. It shows everything. I didn't know then that he was talking about me. We moved through the rooms. My heels clicked against the original hardwood, a sound I usually loved, a metronome of competence, proof that I belonged in spaces other people only dreamed of owning, but now each step felt like a countdown to a detonation I couldn't see. The empty house swallowed our voices and threw them back at us, stripped of warmth, stripped of context, just two sounds bouncing off plaster and regret. I pointed out the restored crown molding that had been stripped and restained by craftsmen from Hood River. I gestured to the original fireplace with the cracked green tile that a previous owner had imported from Italy in 1924. I mentioned the clawfoot tub upstairs, the one that weighed 400 pounds and had once been dropped through a ceiling by careless movers in 1987, an anecdote I told to every potential buyer because it humanized the house, made it seem loved, flawed, survivable. He listened. He asked questions about the water pressure, the age of the roof, the neighborhood's zoning laws. But he watched my face more than the architecture. His eyes, gray-green, the color of the Willamette River in February, when the current runs fast and cold and carries the debris of winter out to sea, stayed on my mouth when I spoke, my hands when I gestured. The hollow of my throat, where my pulse was beating so hard I was certain he could see it. "You're good at this," he said in the kitchen, where the afternoon light came through the dirty window over the sink and turned everything the color of old bone, of teeth left too long in a glass. "Making empty houses feel like they have stories." "They do have stories," I said. My voice sounded like someone else's, someone younger, someone who still believed that stories had happy endings. "We just don't know them. We walk through them like tourists through a graveyard, reading the names and guessing at the lives." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes stayed flat, observant. The eyes of a man who had learned early that surfaces lie. "I want to know them. All of them. That's why I buy these places. I strip them down to the studs and find out what happened inside the walls. Water damage, fire, sometimes." He reached out and touched the plaster near the stove where some long-ago tenant had scrawled initials inside a crude heart. "People leave pieces of themselves behind, fragments, evidence." I looked away. My throat had closed around a stone I had swallowed in another life, in another city. In a hospital room where the blinds had been broken and the light came in stripes across a bed that still smelled of blood and possibility. I thought of the pieces I had left behind. The blanket, the bracelet, the Polaroid hidden in a shoebox in a storage unit I paid for in cash. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Allergies," I lied. "Portland in November. The mold. It's everywhere." "Yes," he said, his gaze drifting to the window, to the swing, to the rain that had begun again, that Portland rain that isn't weather but atmosphere, a liquid gray that seeps into your clothes and your lungs and the spaces between your memories. "It is everywhere." He asked me to coffee. Not that day, not the next. But a week later, when the inspection had come back clean and the keys were sitting in a manila envelope on my desk at the brokerage, heavy and obscene, a tangible proof that I had facilitated yet another transaction between a person and a shelter. He texted me. My number was on the listing, professional, required, as much a part of the property as the square footage, and said, "I owe you a thank you. The coffee shop on Division. Saturday. If you don't have a ceiling to stare at." I had the ceiling. I had the radiator. I had a daughter in Chicago named Maya, who called once a month and spoke in the careful, measured tones of someone managing a chronic condition. I had an ex-husband named David who had taken my youth, my credit score, and my belief in the durability of love, and had left me with a name I no longer knew how to wear, a body that had softened in ways I resented, and a silence so complete that I could hear my own thoughts turning to dust. I went. The coffee shop was one of those Portland places that pretended to be a barn. Exposed beams, communal tables scarred by 1,000 laptops, people typing novels they would never finish while drinking oat milk lattes that cost more than an hour of my mother's wages in 1989. He was already there, in the corner, with 2 cups and a croissant split in half like a secret waiting to be told. He stood when he saw me, a gesture that made my chest ache because it was something David had stopped doing in 2009, and because it was something I didn't deserve from this particular man, from this particular ghost. "Black," he said, sliding the cup toward me. "You didn't strike me as a milk and sugar woman. You don't know what kind of woman I am." He looked at me then. Really looked. The way you look at a painting you've seen before in a dream, but can't place in waking. The way you look at a face in a crowded airport that triggers a memory you didn't know you had. "I think I do," he said. I think you're the kind who memorizes the flaws in a room so no one else notices them. The crack in the ceiling, the squeak in the third stair, the way a house settles at night like it's sighing. You carry a tape measure in your purse and a level in your heart. I wrapped my hands around the cup. The ceramic was hot, almost painful, a small penance I was grateful for. And what do you do with those flaws? I fix them, he said, or I build around them, make them part of the design. The Japanese call it kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold. The flaw becomes the art. I thought of the flaw in my own design, the missing piece, the boy I had built my life around avoiding, brick by brick, lie by lie, until the wall was so high I couldn't see over it and had convinced myself there was nothing on the other side. We talked for 3 hours, not continuously, not comfortably, but with the kind of momentum that builds when two people are circling something they can't name. He told me about his work. He designed restaurants, the kind with Edison bulbs and reclaimed wood and menus that changed with the seasons because nothing good should be permanent. He talked about space the way some men talk about women, with hunger, with reverence, with a sense of something sacred that could be profaned by the wrong touch, the wrong intention. My adoptive father was a carpenter, he said, and the word adoptive landed between us like a knife thrown at a wall and left quivering. He built shelves. Nothing else. Just shelves. For 30 years. He said everything in life had a place, and if you couldn't find it, you built a shelf and put it there. Even people. Especially people. Did he put you on a shelf? I asked. He laughed. It was a dry sound, like leaves scraping concrete, like the last breath of something before winter. He tried, but I was too heavy. I kept falling. Or maybe I was the wrong shape. Maybe I was built for a different wall. I wanted to reach across the table and touch his hand. I wanted to tell him that I had held him once, that he had been light then, impossibly light, a bird with no bones, a warm weight against my chest that had left an indentation that never filled in. I wanted to say that I had built a shelf for him in my heart, and then boarded up the room so I wouldn't hear him crying, so I wouldn't spend the rest of my life listening to an echo I couldn't answer. Instead, I said, parents fail us. It's their job, apparently, their only real qualification. Did you fail your daughter? He asked. The question was casual. A conversational volley, a lob over a net he didn't know was strung with razor wire. But it struck me in the sternum, right where the ribs part to let the heart beat. Maya, I said, and even her name felt foreign in my mouth, a word from a language I had stopped practicing. She's 28. She lives in Chicago, works in marketing. We talk. But you don't see her. She's busy. The city. The career. And you're afraid. I looked up. His eyes had changed color with the afternoon light, turning the gray-green of river water to something colder, more metallic. Afraid of what? That if you see her, you'll see everything you did wrong, or everything you did right that didn't matter. That you'll look at her and realize she's a stranger who happens to share your bone structure. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a scream. People looked. A barista with a septum piercing paused mid-pour. I didn't care. I couldn't care. I have to go, I said, and my voice was a stranger's, high and thin and cracking at the edges like old porcelain. He didn't stop me. He didn't call after me. He just said, quietly, to my back, to the blue scarf I had worn to feel visible. I'm sorry, I do that. I push too hard. I see the weak joist and I press on it. It's a bad habit, a professional deformation. I paused at the door. The rain had started again, that Portland rain that isn't weather but atmosphere, a liquid gray that seeps into your clothes and your lungs and the spaces between your memories, filling them up until they are too heavy to carry. Saturday, he said. There's a place on Alberta. Thai food. If you want to let someone press on a different joist for a while, if you want to be the one doing the pushing. I should have said no. I should have gone home to my radiator and my ceiling and my silence, to the carton of pad thai that had begun to grow a fine fur of mold, to the bed that was too wide and too cold and too full of the ghosts of a marriage that had ended not with a bang, but with a withdrawal. A slow receding of warmth until I woke up one morning and realized I had been sleeping alone for years. Text me the address, I said. And the door of the coffee shop closed behind me with a suction sound, like a seal being broken, like a jar being opened after decades. The Thai place was a storefront with a neon sign that buzzed like an insect in its death throes, casting a sickly orange glow on the wet pavement. He had ordered already pad thai, green curry, something with basil that smelled like the garden my mother had kept in Spokane before she died, and took her judgment with her to the grave, before she had looked at my swollen belly and said, "You will not shame this family," and had shown me the door with the same hand that had once braided my hair. We sat in the back, near the kitchen, where the heat came in waves that smelled of fish sauce and diesel, and the particular steam of rice cookers that have been running since dawn. The clatter of pans covered the gaps in our conversation, gave us permission to be silent without seeming awkward. "Tell me about your worst sale," he said, pouring me wine from a bottle he had brought himself, something red and expensive that didn't belong in a place with paper napkins and plastic chopsticks. "A condo in the Pearl," I said. "Last year. The owner had died in the bathtub, 3 days before the open house. His sister didn't tell me. She didn't want to lose the deposit. I walked in with a couple, sweet, young, first-time buyers, their hands clasped like they were already holding the deed, and the smell. What did you do?" I smiled. I opened the windows. I pointed out the quartz countertops and the view of the Fremont Bridge, and I said, "This place has good energy. It wants to be lived in." While a dead man was decomposing in the next room, while his sister was at a bar celebrating the insurance payout. He didn't laugh. He swirled his wine and watched the legs slide down the glass, thin and red and viscous. "You lied to them. I protected them. Or you protected yourself." I set down my fork. The metal clinked against the ceramic with a sound that made my teeth ache. "What's the difference?" "The difference," he said, leaning forward so that his cologne, that musk, that powder, that terrible, familiar undertone of baby warmth washed over me like a tide, "is that one day the lie rots through the floorboards, and then everyone falls. The people upstairs, the people downstairs, everyone who trusted the structure." I thought of my own floorboards, the lies I had told David when I married him at 24, pregnant with Maya, desperate to build a life that looked legitimate from the street. The lies I told Maya when she was 7 and asked why I didn't have baby pictures of myself from before I met her father. The lies I told the mirror every morning for 32 years, looking for wrinkles that would prove I was old enough to be someone's mother, someone's secret, someone's shame, looking for gray hairs that would make me feel like a different person than the girl who had signed her name on a surrender document in a fluorescent-lit office in Spokane. "Why architecture?" I asked, changing the subject because it was the only weapon I had, the only shield. He chewed slowly, considering, as if the answer were a piece of gristle he had to work through. "Because buildings don't leave. They stay. Even when you strip them down to the frame, the foundation remains. You can always find the original footprint if you dig deep enough. You can always see where the walls were meant to stand. And people? People leave." He said it simply. A fact. A measurement. People leave before you can ask them why. They pack their bags in the night. They sign papers. They disappear into systems and agencies and new lives. And they don't look back because looking back is a luxury they can't afford. I reached for my wine and my hand shook so violently that the liquid sloshed over the rim, a small red stain spreading on the white tablecloth like blood, like a birthmark, like a comma in a sentence that was never finished. He saw. He always saw. It happened 3 weeks later. Not suddenly. Not like a storm, though Portland had plenty of those. Storms that rolled off the Pacific and shook the windows and made the old Victorians groan like ships in high seas. It happened like dampness happens, inches, then miles. Then you wake up one morning and realize your walls are black with mold, and it's too late to clean it, too late to open the windows, too late to pretend you didn't see the rot spreading. He took me to a restaurant he had designed on Mississippi Avenue. Exposed brick that had been salvaged from a demolished brewery, candles in mason jars that threw shadows like prison bars, a ceiling that opened to the sky with a retractable glass panel that was useless in Portland, but beautiful in theory. It was raining, of course, and the drops tapped against the glass like fingers asking to come in, like a child tapping on a window in the night. "You look beautiful," he said, and it wasn't a line. It was an observation, clinical and devastating, the way a doctor might tell you that your blood work is beautiful before delivering the diagnosis. I was wearing a dress I had bought for David's 40th birthday, back when I still believed that marriage was a renovation project and not a demolition. Back when I thought that if I just sanded down the rough edges and applied a fresh coat of paint, we could make it another decade. It was navy silk, too young for me, clinging to hips that had widened and a waist that had softened, and a stomach that bore the silvered map of stretch marks from 2 pregnancies, one kept, one surrendered. I had looked in the mirror before leaving my apartment and seen a woman trying to outrun her own reflection, a woman who had confused visibility with value. "Don't," I said. "Don't what? Look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm a room you want to restore. Like I'm a project. Like I'm broken plaster that needs your gold." He reached across the table and took my hand. His thumb traced the ridge of my knuckles, the veins that had risen with age like rivers on a map, the thin silver scar where I had cut myself opening a can of formula in 1992 in a studio apartment on 3rd Avenue in Spokane that smelled of cabbage and regret and the particular loneliness of girls who have been thrown away by everyone who was supposed to catch them. "Maybe," he said, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated in my sternum. "I just want to know what's behind the drywall, what's under the layers of paint and primer and lies, the original surface, the first truth." We went to his place, a loft in an old industrial building near the Willamette, concrete floors that had been polished until they looked like frozen water, steel beams that ran overhead like the ribs of a leviathan, a bed that looked like it had been built from the bones of a shipwreck, all raw edges and unforgiving angles. He poured whiskey into 2 heavy glasses. We didn't turn on many lights. The city glowed through the tall windows, a constellation of other people's lives, and I stood at the edge of his existence, looking down at the black water, thinking of all the things I had thrown into rivers to make them disappear. The positive test, the ultrasound photo, the bracelet. "Elena," he said behind me. I turned. He was close, too close. The birthmark at his temple throbbed in the half-light. A dark star, a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I had spent 3 decades trying to unread. I reached up without thinking, my fingers traitors, my body a country with no borders, no customs, no guards, and touched it. My fingertip brushed the raised, warm skin. He closed his eyes, leaned into my palm like a cat, like a child, like a man seeking shelter from a storm he had been walking through since birth. a child seeking warmth, a man seeking the source of his own heat. Your hands are cold, he whispered. They've always been cold. Since Spokane. Since always. Then let me warm them. It wasn't passion. Not exactly. Not the passion of romance novels or the movies Maya used to watch with her friends, giggling behind their hands. It was archaeology. It was exhumation. He moved over me like someone brushing dust from a fragile artifact, and I let him because I had spent 32 years burying this, and now I wanted to see what had survived, what had remained intact beneath the weight of all that earth and time and silence. His mouth on my neck, his breath in my ear, hot and wet and smelling of whiskey. The weight of him, familiar and alien, pressing me into the mattress that smelled of sawdust and linen and the particular loneliness of men who build beautiful things and then don't know how to live inside them. And then, God then, in the dark, with his face inches from mine, his eyes closed, his brow furrowed in concentration, I looked at him. And I saw the baby. Not metaphorically, not poetically, not through the soft focus lens of maternal regret. I saw the roundness of his cheeks, still there in the architecture of his adult face. The bow of his lips, the same bow that had opened and closed in that hospital room, searching. The way his eyelashes fluttered against his skin just as they had when I held him in the hospital, before they took him away, before I signed the paper with a hand that shook so hard the nurse had to guide the pen, before the social worker said, "You're doing the right thing," and I had wanted to kill her for her certainty. I turned my face into the pillow. I wept without sound, my body shaking with the force of a grief that had been waiting 32 years for its cue. He didn't know. He thought it was release, pleasure, the soft violence of intimacy, the breaking of a dam. He held me afterward, his hand on my hip, his chin in my hair, and he said, "I've never felt this. Like I belong somewhere, like I'm not a guest in my own life." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I lay there in the dark, in the arms of my son, and I wondered if hell was a place or a moment or a body, and I decided it was all three, a trinity of suffering, a perfect union. I started digging the next day. Not consciously, not like a woman with a plan or a map or a shovel, but like a woman who wakes up with a splinter under her skin and can't stop picking at it until it bleeds, until the infection spreads, until the whole hand is swollen and hot and undeniable. I went to my storage unit in Southeast Portland, the one David didn't know about, the one I had opened in 2003 and paid for in cash every January, a concrete box where I kept the pieces of myself that didn't fit into my current life, the fragments that were too sharp to display. The box was gray, nondescript, number 442. Inside, a wedding dress I had never worn because David had insisted on a courthouse ceremony, letters from a boy named Mark, who had promised to come back from Seattle and never did. Not because he was cruel, but because he was 19 and terrified, and a shoebox labeled Maya, baby, in my mother's handwriting, though my mother had never known about the other child, had never asked, had died still believing I was a virgin who had simply gained weight. I opened it. On top, Maya's hospital bracelet. Her first photo, wrinkled and red, her face compressed into a fist, a lock of hair fine as spider silk, tied with a pink ribbon that had faded to the color of old teeth. And underneath, wrapped in a yellowing receiving blanket that still smelled of dust and time and the particular chemical sweetness of hospital laundry, a Polaroid. Him. 32 years ago, 6 hours old. Eyes closed, mouth open in a silent cry that had probably been loud enough to wake the dead. The birthmark a fresh bruise on his temple, dark and wet. I had taken it in the hospital room before the social worker came with her clipboard and her pity and her practiced neutrality, before the grief counselor sat on the edge of the bed and said, "You have options," as if any of them were real. I had held the disposable camera with one hand and his foot with the other, memorizing the arch, the toes, the way his skin was translucent as wet paper, as if he weren't finished yet, as if he were still becoming. I had kept it. All these years. The one thing I allowed myself. The one piece of evidence that it had happened, that he had been real, that I had been someone else once. I sat on the cold concrete floor of the storage unit, and I held the photo to my chest. The blanket crumbled at the edges, turning to dust in my fingers. My knees drew up. I became, for a moment, the girl I had been. 18, terrified, alone in a city that smelled of fish and rain and the particular despair of girls who have been told they are worthless until they believe it, with a body that had betrayed her by producing love when she had asked for nothing, when she had wanted nothing but to be left alone to finish high school and escape. My phone rang. I flinched so hard I dropped the Polaroid. It was Ethan. "I want to see you," he said. His voice was different. Flat. The voice of a man who had been looking at blueprints for too long. "Tonight. I need to show you something." "What?" "A letter. From the adoption agency. They found my birth mother. They found information." The concrete floor tilted. The storage unit became a ship on a black ocean, a vessel with no sails, no anchor. I gripped the Polaroid until my fingernails left half moons in the emulsion, until I felt the chemical layers separate under the pressure. "Elena, I'm here. Will you come? I don't want to open it alone. I don't want to know her name by myself." I looked at the photo in my hand, the baby who had become a man. The man who was waiting for a letter that would tell him my name, my age, my city. The man who had held me in the dark and said he felt like he belonged. "Yes," I said. "I'll come." His loft was dark when I arrived. Not romantic dark. Not the dark of intimacy. Heavy dark. The kind of dark that comes before a storm that doesn't end. The kind that sits in the chest like a tumor. He was sitting on the steel and wood bench he had built himself, elbows on knees, a single sheet of paper between his fingers like a blade, like a warrant. He didn't look up when I came in. He just said, to the floor, to the concrete, to the ghosts in the wood, "You didn't tell me you were from Spokane." Spokane. The word was a hand around my throat, a garrote made of memory. I hadn't lived there in 30 years. I had buried Spokane under Portland's moss and rain, under 2 marriages and a career, and 1,000 mornings of pretending that the girl who had signed those papers had been someone else, a character in a movie I had watched once and forgotten. "I don't talk about it," I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well, from a grave, from a storage unit filled with fragments. "You don't talk about a lot of things." He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying, from rage held so tightly it had turned inward, calcified, become part of the structure. "The agency sent me a letter. Non-identifying information, they called it. But it identifies plenty. Birth mother, 18 years old. Born in Spokane. Moved to Portland in her 20s. Real estate." He laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender, like bones being ground. "Real estate, Elena, that's pretty fucking identifying. That's a signature. That's a fingerprint." I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand still on the handle, rain dripping from my coat onto his concrete floor, forming a small puddle at my feet. The Polaroid was in my pocket. I could feel it burning through the fabric, through the skin, into the bone. "Is there anything you want to say?" he asked. I thought of all the things I had rehearsed in mirrors, in cars, In the dark at 3 a.m. when the radiator clanked and the ceiling stained and the silence grew teeth. The speeches I had written for a day that never came, that I had never allowed myself to imagine. I am sorry. I was young. I loved you enough to let you go. I have thought of you every day. You have a sister. I am broken. Please forgive me. Please don't hate me. Please don't leave me again, even though I was the one who left. Instead, I said, "How long have you known?" "Since Tuesday." He stood. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe I had shrunk. Maybe the years had compressed my spine, my soul. I sat in a coffee shop on 23rd and I read that letter 12 times. And then I went to your office. I stood across the street. I saw you through the window. You were laughing with a client. You were wearing that blue scarf. And I thought, she knows. She has known since the Victorian, since the first coffee, since she touched my face in the dark and cried into my pillow. She knew, and she let me. She let me. He couldn't finish. The sentence broke in his mouth like a dry stick. I didn't know, I whispered. Not at first. Not until the house, the birthmark. I wanted to tell you. I tried. When? He demanded. His voice cracked, the veneer of control splintering. When we were in bed? When you were letting me inside you? When you were moaning my name? When did the trying happen exactly? Because I don't remember a moment of hesitation. I don't remember a word of warning. I remember you opening your legs and your eyes and your lies, and I remember thinking, finally, finally, someone sees me. Finally, someone knows what I am without me having to explain. And all along, you were the reason I needed explaining in the first place. The words hung in the air like smoke, like poison. I felt them settle on my skin, in my lungs, in the spaces between my ribs. I felt them become part of me, permanent, structural. I see you, I said. My voice was steady now. A realtor's voice, a liar's voice, a mother's voice, cracked and worn and useless. I've always seen you, even when I wasn't there, even when I had no right. I saw you in every baby on the street, in every man of a certain age, in every birthmark on every stranger. He let go of my hand. He stepped back. He picked up the letter from the bench and folded it with precision, the way he folded blueprints, the way he built walls that would stand for 100 years. I want you to move in, he said. I blinked. The words didn't make sense. They were in the wrong order, the wrong language. What? Move in. Here, with me. He didn't smile. He didn't soften. His face was a mask, a facade, a building with no windows. You owe me 32 years. You owe me every night you slept while I was awake wondering why. You owe me the birthdays, the Christmases, the skinned knees and the prom nights, and the first heartbreak that you weren't there for. You owe me the graduation I didn't want to attend because there was no one in the crowd who mattered. You owe me the wedding I'll never have because I don't know how to trust anyone enough to stand at an altar. You can't give me those. They're gone. They're dust. But you can give me now. Every day. Every night. Until I say stop. Until I've looked at you long enough to understand what kind of woman throws her child in the garbage and then sleeps with him 30 years later. The word garbage cut deeper than any slap, any knife, any word I had ever heard, because it was what I had done, not literally, but essentially, structurally. I had discarded him. I had prioritized my survival over his. I had been 18 and desperate and alone, and I had made a choice that couldn't be unmade, that couldn't be renovated, that couldn't be painted over. And if I say no? I asked. My voice was small, the voice of the girl in the hospital room. He turned. His face was calm now, the calm of a man who has crossed a line and found the other side empty, a desert, a ruin. Then I tell Maya, he said. I tell your daughter. I tell your brokerage. I tell the world what Elena Voss did. And I don't mean the adoption. I mean the rest. The part where you knew and you stayed. The part where you let me fall in love with a woman who was a ghost. The part where you fucked your own son because you were too broken to tell the truth. I stood in the doorway of his loft, in the arms of a choice that had no right answer, no exit, no window. The rain tapped against the glass. The river moved below, black and indifferent. And I thought of the baby in the Polaroid, the one with the birthmark and the translucent skin and the mouth open in a silent cry, and I wondered if he had ever imagined this moment, if he had ever rehearsed it in the dark, and if he had, whether he had wanted me to say yes or no or simply disappear again, evaporate, become the nothing he had been told he came from. Pack a bag, I said. And the shelf was built. That was 6 months ago. The winter turned to spring. The moss on the roof of the Victorian thickened into a velvet carpet. The rain didn't stop. It simply changed temperature, becoming warmer, heavier, more insistent. I moved my clothes, my blazers, my blouses, my lies, my blue scarves, into the spare room of Ethan's loft. The room with the concrete wall and the single window that faced an alley where delivery trucks idled at dawn, where the driver sometimes sang along to the radio in a language I didn't understand, where the exhaust painted the air gray. I cooked. I cleaned. I sat on the couch with a laptop and pretended to work while he drew plans at the steel table, his pencil scratching like an insect burrowing into wood, like a heart being excavated. We didn't touch. We didn't discuss the weather. We didn't share meals. Not really. I left food on the counter and he ate it later, or he ordered takeout and left mine in the refrigerator with my name on it, as if I were an employee, a tenant, a specimen. We existed in the same space the way two ghosts might occupy a house, aware, overlapping, silent, each waiting for the other to vanish. Maya called once. It was March. She sounded different. Lighter. Mom, she said, I'm pregnant. I sat down on the edge of the spare bed. The concrete floor was cold through my socks. Through the open door, I could see Ethan at his table, his back to me, his shoulders hunched over a blueprint. That's wonderful, I said. My voice sounded like a recording. How far along? 12 weeks. It's a girl. We think. Probably. A girl. My granddaughter. I pressed my hand to my mouth. I thought of the baby in the Polaroid. I thought of the baby in Maya's womb. I thought of the man in the next room, who was an uncle and a brother and a stranger, and I felt the geometry of my family collapse into a shape that had no name, no category, no place in any architecture. Mom, are you there? Yes, I said. I'm here. I'm happy for you, Maya. I really am. I hung up. Ethan hadn't turned around. But I saw his shoulders rise and fall with a breath that was too deep, too deliberate. He had heard. He heard everything in that loft. The walls were thin. The silence was thinner. Tonight, he is in his room. The door is closed. I am in the hallway, in my nightgown, my hand on the knob of his door. I have heard him crying. Not the loud, theatrical weeping of a man performing grief for an audience, but the small, strangled sounds a child makes when he thinks no one is listening, when he believes the house is empty and the world has forgotten him. I stand there. The metal is cold. My palm remembers the weight of his heart from that night 6 months ago, when he pressed my hand to his chest and I had felt the trapped bird beating against my skin. My body remembers the shape of his. My mind, my treacherous, broken, renovated mind, remembers the hospital room in Spokane, The way the light came through the broken blinds in stripes across the empty bed. The way the nurse had said, "You can hold him for a minute." And the way I had counted his fingers, all 10. Perfect. As if the world had any right to perfection, as if I had any right to touch it. I don't open the door. Because I am not his mother. Not really. Not in any way that counts. I am the woman who gave birth to him and then gave him away, and then took him back in the only form he would allow, a servant, a witness, a ghost in his house, a penance walking in human skin. I am the flaw in the foundation, the crack in the load-bearing wall, the water damage that warps the floorboards. And if I enter that room, if I hold him while he cries, if I try to be what I failed to be 32 years ago, if I try to be a mother now, I will destroy the fragile architecture of his survival. I will collapse the shelf he has built. I will prove that I am exactly what he thinks I am. A woman who takes without asking, who touches without permission, who loves in all the wrong ways. I let my hand fall. I step back. The floor is cold. The loft is dark. The city breathes outside. Indifferent. Vast. Full of mothers and sons who have found healthier ways to miss each other. In the morning, I will make the coffee strong. I will wear my blue scarf. I will sit on the couch. And I will be seen. That is the penance. That is the shelf. That is the only love I have left to give. The love of a woman who stays in the doorway because she knows she has lost the right to enter, who knows that some rooms can only be entered alone. The rain starts again. It never really stops in Portland. It just changes intensity, temperature, weight. And I stand in the hallway listening to my son cry behind a closed door, and I wonder if this is what he wanted all along. Not my confession, not my body, not my regret, not my explanations or my tears or my 32 years of silent, crushing devotion. Just my presence, just my witness. Just me, finally, where he can see me, where he can decide, one day, whether to open the door, or let me stand here forever. And so Elena Voss stands in the hallway of a loft that will never be her home, wearing a nightgown that has seen better days, listening to a man who is her son cry in a room she cannot enter. She has spent her life selling houses to strangers, polishing the surfaces of other people's happiness, measuring square footage while her own life shrank to the size of a storage unit in Southeast Portland. She thought she was building walls to protect herself, but she was only building a prison with better lighting. She thought she could renovate her past, strip it down to the studs, make it beautiful. But some foundations are poured in concrete so wet with tears that they never fully set. Some rooms are meant to stay empty, and some doors, once closed, can never be opened again, not because the knob is stuck, but because the hand on the other side has forgotten how to turn it. Elena wanted to be a mother. Then she wanted to be free. Then she wanted to be forgiven. Now she only wants to be allowed to stand in the hallway, to be seen, to be the ghost that haunts her son's house with quiet devotion. She has learned the hardest lesson of all, that love is not a renovation. It is not a transaction. It is not a house you can stage with fresh flowers and hope. Love is the crack in the wall that lets the light in, but it is also the crack that lets the cold in. And Elena has spent 32 years shivering in a bed she made for herself, alone. The question is not whether Ethan will forgive her. The question is whether any of us can survive the rooms we build to hide from who we really are. And if we do survive, if we stand in the hallway, if we make the coffee, if we wear the blue scarf and wait, does that make us brave? Or does it just make us too broken to leave? On Wisteria Lane, they say every house has a secret. But the truth is, every house is a secret. And Elena Voss is just beginning to understand that the only way out of a room is through the door you are most afraid to open. The problem is, she has spent so long standing on the wrong side of it, she can no longer tell if she is knocking to get in or knocking to get out. And that, my friends, is the real estate of the human heart. It looks solid from the street, but inside, the pipes are leaking, the foundation is shifting, and someone is always crying in a room you cannot enter. The question is, do you walk away, or do you stay and listen and hope that one day the door opens? Good night and good luck.